In the autumn of 1996, inside a private rehearsal facility on the eastern edge of Burbank, California, a room that held 47 people went completely silent in the space of 11 seconds. The facility was a converted warehouse on Olive Avenue. The ceiling was exposed steel, and the floor was sprung hardwood, the kind used in gymnasiums and serious training spaces. There were no windows on the east wall. The light came from 4 industrial rigs overhead, and it fell flat and without mercy on everything beneath it. There were 47 people in that room. Some of them were stunt coordinators, some were fight choreographers, several held black belts in systems that most people have never heard of. All of them had at one point or another in their professional lives seen violence rendered with technical precision. None of them, by their own later account, had seen anything that happened in those 11 seconds coming. The man who caused that silence was 29 years old. He stood 6 feet tall and weighed 218 pounds. He had trained in full-contact karate since the age of 7, beginning in a church gymnasium in Brooklyn under a man named Moses Powell, who had himself studied under the founders of 2 separate Japanese martial lineages. By the time the man in question was 19, he held a black belt in Shotokan. By 22, he had added Goju Ryu. By 26, he had accumulated credentials in Kyokushin, Tang Soo Do, Taekwondo, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, at a time when most American practitioners did not know how to spell the words. He had competed, he had won, he had fought men who outweighed him by 60 pounds and left those encounters standing. His name was Michael Jai White. In 11 seconds, in front of 47 witnesses who collectively held more than 300 years of martial arts experience, Michael Jai White would do something that no one in that room expected. If you want to know what he did, stay with this until the end. Because what happened in those 11 seconds would be repeated in dojos and on film sets, and in quiet conversations between serious people for the next 3 decades. And the man standing across from him when it happened had spent the better part of 15 years telling the world that no one could do what Michael Jai White did that afternoon. That man was Steven Seagal. To understand what happened in Burbank, you need to understand what Steven Seagal was in 1996. He was not simply famous. Fame is a soft word, and it does not carry the specific weight of what Seagal had built by the mid-90s. He had arrived in Hollywood in the late 1980s with a biography that no casting agent could have invented. Born in Lansing, Michigan in 1952, he had traveled to Japan as a young man and done what almost no Westerner had done before him. He had earned a legitimate black belt in Aikido, and then a second degree, and then he had opened a dojo in Osaka and taught the art to Japanese students in their own country. He returned to the United States holding a 7th degree black belt, a rank that placed him in a category occupied by perhaps 40 or 50 people on the planet at that time. He was 6'4". He weighed 235 pounds. He moved with the particular economy of a man who had practiced the same technique 10,000 times and had stopped needing to think about it. When Above the Law opened in 1988, audiences saw something they had not seen in an American action film before. The violence was not theatrical. It did not pause for effect. It arrived and was completed before the opponent understood what had been initiated. Hard to Kill followed. Marked for Death followed. Under Siege made $156 million worldwide. By 1994, Steven Seagal was one of the 12 highest-paid actors in the American film industry. He had given interviews in which he described his martial skill in terms that left no interpretive room. He had, he said, never lost a fight. He had trained Navy SEALs. He had trained CIA operatives. The specific details varied across tellings. But the architecture of the claim was constant. No one he had faced in a serious context had emerged from that context uninjured and undefeated. In 1996, on the Burbank set of a project that would eventually be released under a different title than the one it carried during production, Steven Seagal was 44 years old.
And he was the most credentialed martial artist working in the American entertainment industry. He had not, as yet, met Michael Jai White in a professional context. The meeting was arranged through a mutual acquaintance whose name has never been publicly attached to this story, and who requested, when the details were recounted to the people who would later describe them,
that it remain unattached. Michael Jai White had been brought onto the project in a consulting capacity. His role was technical. He was there to evaluate the fight choreography for physical authenticity, to identify sequences where the mechanics were wrong in ways that trained eyes would register, and to suggest corrections. He was 29 years old and he had not yet appeared in the film that would make his name widely recognizable. He was known in martial arts circles. He was not known in the way Seagal was known. He arrived at the Olive Avenue facility at 9:30 in the morning. He signed in at the production desk. He was given a visitor's badge on a lanyard, which he placed in his jacket pocket rather than wearing around his neck. He sat in the fourth row of folding chairs that had been arranged along the north wall to observe the morning rehearsal. He had a cup of coffee. He watched. What he watched was a choreography run-through involving 4 stunt performers, and a sequence built around Aikido wrist control entries. The sequence was technically literate. The stunt performers knew their marks. The problem, which White identified within the first 3 repetitions, was in the geometry of the entry. The angle of approach created a window. A trained practitioner working in almost any full-contact striking system would see that window, and what it meant was that the sequence, as designed, would not survive contact with anyone who had spent serious time in a competitive environment. He did not say this immediately. He watched the sequence run 4 more times. He finished his coffee. He set the cup on the floor beside his chair with a deliberate movement, the kind of movement that does not make a sound. When the run-through paused for a technical discussion between the choreographer and the director of photography, White walked to where Steven Seagal was standing near the north camera position and introduced himself. The introduction lasted approximately 45 seconds. At some point during those 45 seconds, White mentioned the window in the geometry. He described it plainly and without elaboration. He indicated, with a specific reference to the angle of approach, where the problem was. Seagal listened. He did not respond immediately. When he did respond, he said that the sequence was designed for a particular performer with particular attributes, and that the geometry was intentional. White said that he understood that. He said that the window remained regardless of intent. Seagal said that the window was theoretical. White said that he could demonstrate that it was not. The room did not go quiet at this moment. The room went quiet approximately 30 seconds later when Seagal said yes. Before we tell you what happened in those 11 seconds, we want to ask you something. If this is the kind of story you come here for, the kind that takes its time and earns what it shows you, make sure you are subscribed to this channel, hit the bell, and tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching this from. We have viewers in places that still surprise us every week. Now back to Burbank. The 47 people in the room redistributed themselves without being asked. The choreography rehearsal stopped. The stunt performers moved to the perimeter. The director of photography, a man named Gerald Caruso, who had worked on the set of 4 Seagal pictures and who would later describe what he witnessed to a colleague at a Directors Guild function in 2004, set both hands flat on the top of a camera case and did not move them again until it was over. Michael Jai White removed his jacket. He folded it once along the center seam. He set it on the seat of the folding chair in the 4th row. He walked to the center of the sprung hardwood floor. He was wearing a dark gray t-shirt and black training pants and flat-soled shoes. He stood with his weight distributed evenly and his hands at his sides. Seagal came to the center of the floor from the north side. He was wearing what he had worn all morning: dark clothing, soft-soled shoes, his hair tied back. He was 6 inches taller than White. He outweighed him by 17 pounds. Nobody in that room knew that they were about to watch something that would be repeated in serious conversation for the next 30 years. The specific understanding between the 2 men, as described by witnesses, was this: White would initiate from a distance of 8 feet, using whatever approach he chose. He would attempt to demonstrate the window. Seagal would respond as he would respond. The purpose was technical demonstration, not competition. That was the understanding. What followed was something different. A fight, when it is conducted between 2 men of genuine skill, is not a collision. It is a conversation about space. Every trained fighter carries in his body a specific map of the distances at which he is dangerous, and the distances at which he is not.
The first thing a serious practitioner does when he stands across from an opponent is read that map. He does not look at the face. he does not look at the hands. He looks at the geometry of the body as it relates to the floor, because the floor is the one thing that does not lie. Michael Jai White had been reading geometry since he was 7 years old.
At 8 feet, he was outside effective striking range for either man. He did not begin from there. He took one step to his left that closed the distance to 6 feet and changed the angle. And in the taking of that step, he had already communicated something to everyone in the room who had the vocabulary to read it. He was not approaching on a straight line. He was approaching on an arc. Seagal recognized the arc. His body shifted to compensate. That shift was what White had been waiting for. Second 1. White closed the remaining 6 feet, not in 2 steps but in one movement that covered the distance diagonally and arrived at a position outside Seagal's right shoulder. A position from which Aikido's primary wrist control entries cannot be effectively initiated because the geometry does not support them. The movement took less than a second and covered more ground than the witnesses expected from a standing start. The director of photography, Gerald Caruso, did not move his hands from the camera case. Second 2. Seagal rotated to realign his center line. It was a correct response and it was fast. A man of lesser training would not have made it. But the rotation required a weight transfer, and in the instant of that weight transfer, White did what he had said he would do. He entered through the window. The entry was a controlled strike to the midsection, not full power. The witnesses would later agree on this. Not full power, but not light either. Initiated from a distance of 4 inches, and using a short horizontal elbow that bypassed the wrist control entry entirely, because it never went near the wrist. It arrived at its target before the defensive posture was complete. Second 3. Seagal moved back. 1 step controlled. Second 4. White did not follow. He stopped exactly where he was and returned his hands to his sides. This was not hesitation. The witnesses who were trained recognized what it was immediately. It was patience. It was the particular stillness of a man who has made his point and is waiting to see if it needs to be made again. It did not need to be made again. Second 5. A stunt coordinator named Ray Park, who had 14 years of wushu training, and who was standing at the west wall 12 feet from the exchange, exhaled. He did it quietly, but the woman standing next to him heard it, and she later described it as the sound of a man releasing something he had been holding, without knowing he was holding it. Seconds 6 through 9. The room made no sound. The light from the 4 industrial rigs overhead fell on the sprung hardwood floor with the same indifference it falls on everything. Somewhere on the street outside the warehouse, a delivery truck moved through an intersection. The signal light changed. The driver did not know, and would never know, that 11 feet away from where he idled, something was finishing. Second 10. Michael Jai White turned from the center of the floor and walked back toward the 4th row of folding chairs. Second 11. Steven Seagal remained where he was. The witnesses would later describe what they saw in that moment with a consistency that is unusual in accounts of this kind, because memory is unreliable and people who have watched the same event tend to construct different versions of it from different angles. But on 2 details, all accounts converge. The first detail is this: when White reached the 4th row of chairs, he did not immediately pick up his jacket. He stood beside the chair for a moment. The stunt coordinator Ray Park walked from the west wall to where White was standing and placed one hand briefly on White's shoulder. He said nothing. White nodded once. The second detail is what Steven Seagal said. He said it quietly, from the center of the floor, and it was not said to the room.
It was said in the direction of White, and it was said low enough that the only people who heard it clearly were the 4 individuals standing within 8 feet of him. But those 4 individuals all heard the same thing, and what they heard was this: he said that White was fast. He said it without qualification.
He said it in the tone of a man who is making an observation rather than offering praise, because there is a difference between the two, and men who have trained seriously their entire lives understand the difference without being told. What he said next was heard only by Michael Jai White. White was at the 4th row by then, picking up his jacket. He held it by the collar and did not put it on immediately. Seagal crossed the floor to where White was standing, and the two men stood close enough to speak without being heard by anyone else in the room. Whatever passed between them in those seconds was not recorded. White has not discussed it in specific terms in any public context. Seagal has not discussed it at all. What happened after the private exchange is this. White put on his jacket. He collected the lanyard badge from his pocket and looked at it for a moment and set it on the seat of the folding chair. He left the facility through the east door. The production assistant at the desk watched him go. She noted in the call sheet log, in the space reserved for departure times, that he signed out at 11:14 in the morning. The rehearsal resumed 40 minutes later. The geometry of the sequence had been revised. The story left that warehouse in the way stories of that kind always leave the places where they happen. Not quickly, not loudly. Slowly, and through the specific channels that exist between people who train seriously, and who know other people who train seriously. The stunt coordinator Ray Park told a colleague at a Muay Thai gym in North Hollywood 2 weeks after the event. That colleague was a man who had trained under Benny Urquidez, and he told the story to 3 students at the end of a session, in a way that preserved the essential structure but added a detail about the number of people present that the primary witnesses would have disputed. The detail that was added was that there had been more than 100 people in the room. There had been 47. But 100 is a more durable number in oral history because it carries a different weight, and stories when they travel seek the details that make them travel further. By 1998, a version of the account was circulating in professional stunt communities in both Los Angeles and Vancouver. By 2002, elements of it had appeared in a martial arts publication in a form sufficiently altered from the original that the publication believed it was reporting something new. The essential structure, however, remained intact across all versions. A room, a demonstration, a window in a geometry that no one else had identified, and 11 seconds that changed the specific silence of a space containing 47 trained witnesses. Gerald Caruso, the director of photography who had set his hands on the camera case, retired from feature film work in 2011. In the year before his retirement, he gave a long interview to a trade publication about the technical evolution of action cinematography. Near the end of the interview, in a section that the publication chose not to run but that circulated in a longer unedited transcript among the interviewer's colleagues, Caruso described the Burbank incident from his own vantage point. He described the entry. He described the window. He described what he had felt in his hands on top of the camera case at the moment of the exchange. He said that in 31 years of working on action productions, he had seen a great deal of choreographed violence and a small amount of real violence, and that there is a difference between the two that is immediately apparent to anyone who has seen both. He said that what happened on the sprung hardwood floor in those 11 seconds belonged to the second category. He said he had not put his hands on a camera case in the same way since. Michael Jai White went on to appear in Spawn in 1997, becoming the first black actor to headline a major studio superhero film. He trained in additional disciplines through the late 90s and into the 2000s, adding boxing and Hapkido to the credentials he already carried. He appeared in Black Dynamite in 2009 and produced a body of work in martial arts film that critics who cover the form with seriousness have compared to the peak output of the Hong Kong tradition. He gave interviews over the years in which he discussed his training with a specificity that practitioners recognized immediately, the kind of specificity that cannot be performed, that can only be accumulated through years of contact. He discussed the Burbank incident once in a context that was not a formal interview. He described it as a technical conversation. He used the word demonstration. He did not elaborate. Steven Seagal's trajectory through the same years followed a different arc. The commercial peak of the mid-90s gave way to a long and complicated middle period that has been analyzed in enough other places that it does not require extensive treatment here. He continued to describe his martial credentials in terms that remained unchanged from the terms he had used in the late 80s. He was awarded an honorary black belt in judo by a Russian federation in a ceremony that was photographed and reported on. He appeared in Russia at functions attended by political figures. He gave interviews. He did not discuss Burbank. There is a particular quality to the stories that survive serious martial arts communities across decades. They are not the stories of who won and who lost exactly, though they contain that information. They are stories about what was seen and what it meant to see it. The value of a story in those communities is indexed not to the fame of the people involved but to the quality of the instruction it carries. A story survives because it teaches something that cannot be taught as well by a direct statement. What the Burbank story teaches is this: the distance between a claim and the thing the claim describes is sometimes very small and sometimes enormous, and the only reliable way to measure it is with the body. Numbers and titles and biographical details are a kind of language, and language is useful, but it is not the same as the demonstration. A man can carry a 7th-degree black belt and a filmography and a biography that reads like a legend and still contain, somewhere in the architecture of his technique, a window. Every system has a window. The purpose of training, serious training, the kind conducted over decades without regard for the audience watching, is to find the windows in your own system before someone else finds them for you. Michael Jai White found a window that 47 experienced witnesses had not found. He found it not by being larger or younger or more credentialed. He found it by having spent 22 years training to see the geometry of a moving body in relation to the floor, and to trust what he saw, and to enter through what he found without hesitation and without announcement. That is the only lesson. Everything else is detail. The stunt coordinator Ray Park continued working in the Los Angeles production community until 2018, when he relocated to New Mexico to run a training facility that focuses on integrating traditional martial arts with film production technique. He teaches classes on Tuesday and Thursday evenings and on Saturday mornings. In 2021, he gave a seminar at a regional martial arts gathering in Albuquerque, in which he discussed, among other things, the particular quality of stillness that a practitioner develops when he has seen something he did not expect to see, and has had to find a way to absorb it. He did not name names. He did not name cities. He described the quality of the light in the room as falling flat on the floor and being indifferent to what happened beneath it. Several people at that seminar said afterward that they knew what room he was talking about. Several of them had been there. In the winter of 2019, a martial arts instructor in Toronto who had trained under 2 of the witnesses from the Burbank facility was teaching a class of advanced students in a technique that addressed exactly the kind of window that had been demonstrated that day in 1996. At the end of the class, when the students were cooling down, one of them asked where the instructor had first encountered the concept. The instructor said he had heard a story. He said the story had come from someone who was in a room a long time ago. He said the person who had demonstrated the concept was a very fast man who had folded his jacket very carefully before he walked to the center of a hardwood floor. The student asked, "What happened?" The instructor said that what happened took 11 seconds. He said that sometimes 11 seconds is the longest unit of time a room full of trained people has ever experienced. He said that after those 11 seconds, the fast man picked up his jacket and left through a door, and the room stayed quiet for longer than rooms usually stay quiet. The student asked who the fast man was. The instructor said his name. The student knew the name. Everyone in that class knew the name. The student thought about it for a moment and then said that it made sense. He said that it made sense because of the way the man moved on film, the specific economy of it, the way nothing was wasted, the way the distance between intention and execution seemed shorter than it should be. The instructor nodded. He said that what you see on a screen is always a reduced version of what is there. He said that the screen cannot hold everything. He said that the 11 seconds in that room were not something the screen was ever asked to hold, and that was probably appropriate, because some things are better carried by the people who were in the room. He picked up his jacket from the bench along the wall. He folded it once. He put it over his arm. He turned off the lights. Next week, we will tell you the story of what happened on a film set in Vancouver in 1993, when Jean-Claude Van Damme made a specific claim in front of 11 witnesses, and was introduced, 40 minutes later, to a man who had been listening from the hallway. His name will surprise you. Stay subscribed, and we will see you then.